All right, so now I have a simple poster design. It's built up of the following components. It starts with just a blank white background, but the image size of that blank white background is big. It's 18 inches by 24 inches by 350 pixels per inch. And then I filled with the rectangular marquee a 17 by 23 inch, or no, actually a 16 by 22 inch rectangle that I filled in with middle gray, because I think all poster designs should have a white border because they're all printed with that. And so it helps you understand how that works. And then I filled that middle section in with a gradation using just the gradation tool and choosing my colors, kind of earth tone gradation. Then I put in a texture fill of kind of this particulate. And I could try others as well. I could try multiply. I could try color burn, give it a little bit more. Then I brought in my spot illustration. And then I brought in my EPS black text treatment that's customized from a font. Okay, so now I'm going to play with the colorizing of the of the text. So let me see. But let me get this the way I want it first. Now another way you can do a border, and I like to do this a lot, if I take my layer of just the gray square and I select the empty space around it, this white, and then I duplicate that from my white background, I can put a white border on the top of everything. So it looks like this. And now that white border, no matter what I put behind it, will always be a crisp white. So let me see. Kind of like that. Okay, so now I want to play with the coloring of the text. So there's a few ways I can do this, but first I'm going to save this project because this is now my poster assignment. So I'm going to save it as Carl Fry, assignment 11, sorry, assignment 8. Forgot what class I was teaching. Poster and text design. To the desktop for now, as a Photoshop file. Okay, my favorite way to color vector smart objects is to just use layer styles. So double click on your layer. And I guess if you want to be cautious about it, you can make a duplicate and turn off one of them. So you can always compare it with the black. And now we're going to play with all of these tools, which are pretty gimmicky tools for amateur Photoshop users. But when it comes to text design, they are wonderful. So the first thing you can play with is color overlay, which is simply, at its most basic, just picking a color that you change the black into. And of course you can do this in Illustrator, but in Illustrator it's tougher to use the drop tool and just pick a color. And so it's good to pick a color from something that's already in your illustration. Ooh, I like that kind of deep maroon red. So I have a lot of nice variety there. Yeah, that helps. Okay. Then you can play with the opacity of it. And because my underneath layer is black, the opacity will just give me darker and darker variations on it. So I kind of like how that looks. Okay, other things I can try. A gradient overlay. Now, what a gradient overlay does is it puts a gradient on top of that color treatment, right? And right now it's a 90-degree linear gradient. Let me zoom in on the text so you can see it a little bit better. It starts light at the top, dark at the bottom. But you can even change the colors of your gradient. I can make it match what I was using for the background, for instance. And I can change my colors here. So I can go from that bright red to instead a much deeper red. So that's my gradient. And I can play with the opacity of that and the scale of it, like how strongly it shifts. See? Let's reverse it so it's lighter on top, darker on the bottom. So you can play with the angle, but top to bottom seems to make a lot of sense. And we can play with the blending mode. Which in this case doesn't seem to matter too much. Okay, other things we can do. Because it's a vector, we understand this language pretty well. We can add a stroke around it. So what if I really needed this text to show up cleanly? Well, I can put a stroke down. The default is black, but I can change that color to anything I want, like maybe this blue. And again, I can steal the color from my image itself. And then with that stroke, I can position it outside of my vector, or inside of my vector shape, or in between, so right on the edges. I can adjust the size of the stroke, make it very subtle, and I can blend it in with the background. So it's multiply mode. I can play with its opacity, so the stroke is letting the background show through. Now what I like best about using layer styles with text is you can just turn them on and off and see what effect they have. So I want that just very, very faint kind of blue stroke outline. Because strokes are a little harsh looking, right? Now we can also play with things like glows and drop shadows. And you'll see how effective those are, especially for text, helping it pop out. Right? And just like you can with the stroke, you can affect almost everything about the drop shadow. The distance that it separates from your background, the spread of the shadow, which does a nice kind of growing of it, while not weakening it at all, and the size, which softens it out. And then the angle, kind of set the angle of the lighting. So if I set it from above, maybe that would be most effective. And I can change the color of the drop shadow. So instead of it just being black, I can pick maybe the deepest blue that we have in my design and use that. And the opacity of it, how strong. So we can keep playing with these, kind of figure out what we want. let's do this one. I'm going to do a gradient that's low opacity on one side. All right. So all of these decisions are things you want to think about, play with, decide on. And you can just turn them on and off under the effects of the layer. Now I generally like drop shadows, but I think it weakens the graphic effect of this. So some other options you can use, things like outer glow, which is made for kind of a color hold effect. Its default is a yellow glow. Let's make its size a little bit bigger so you can see it. See, so it just kind of softens the edges. And if I combine that with the drop shadow, it'll make the drop shadow a lot less severe, right? A lot more subtle. And again, you can just play kind of turning off and on these certain effects. So that outer glow does that. You can set different opacities. All right, so that's how I recommend adding color to your poster. I'm going to save it. And now I'm going to do the kanji characters underneath that are all part of my sketch. Again, we have to be motivated by not just what we can do, but what we plan to do, what we envisioned. We are artists. Of course, we want to be inspired by the tools we find, but we don't want to be dictated by them. Okay, so the text I want to use is this. And I'm just going to do kind of our old techniques. I'm going to open it up in Photoshop. I'm going to isolate the text I want by cutting it out. Actually, I can probably do this pretty easily. Just selecting around it. You can see this is a very basic type treatment. It's just red block characters with a white stroke outline. Okay, I'm going to duplicate that onto its own file. I'm going to use the magic wand, contiguous unchecked, at 32 tolerance, to select all the reds, duplicate those onto their own channel. Then I'm going to save that. Maybe I'll rotate it first. And I'm going to save that as a PNG. Okay, to the desktop. Then I'm going to go back to Illustrator. I'm going to open up my Illustrator file. I'm going to lock all my layers so I don't accidentally mess them up. And I'm going to bring in that PNG.